Welcome everyone, good afternoon, to our weekly class on Ethics of the Fathers. We're at the end of chapter 5 and we're in the middle of a paragraph where it talks about the different milestones in a person's life. And we already discussed the 5-year-old. 5-year-old is the age for mikra, for scripture, for studying the written Torah. 10 is the age for Mishnah, for the oral teachings of the Torah. And 13 is when you become obligated to fulfill the commandments. 15 is when you start studying the intricacies of the Talmud, which devotes itself to analyzing, supplementing the Mishnah. 18 is the age of marriage, the ideal age for marriage. And then we started doing the age of 20, and it's a very cryptic term used. 20 is the age of pursuing. How does he put it over here? The pursuit. It doesn't say what. The pursuit of what. So there were about 6 different explanations given. Whenever the rabbis of the Mishnah are very cryptic, when they don't explain what they mean, it brings about many different interpretations. Some say that it means that when 18 is the ideal age to get married, but you don't have to rush. You don't have to, you take it easy. You're still young. But when you reach the hoary old age of 20, then you should start pursuing it, not just being passive, doing whatever it takes to find yourself a mate to get married. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is it means reviewing your studies. The focus, a lot of the focus in these teachings are about the study of Torah. So even though you already mastered everything when you were 5 till 10, you mastered all of the Tanakh, all of the written Torah. From 10 to 15, you mastered all of the Mishnah. 15 to 20, you mastered all of the Talmud. Ideally, of course, this doesn't mean that everyone was able to master everything, but this was the ideal. So you think when you're 20, that's it, you already accomplished everything, you already reached the top. So the Mishnah says no, it's to pursue it and to review it once again. It's customary whenever we finish the study of a whole volume of the Talmud, there's a phrase that is recited which reads in translation, "We will return to you." Just because we finished it doesn't mean, and we're going on to the next volume, doesn't mean we're abandoning you. We will come back to you. That's a refrain in every time we finish a volume of the Talmud. So when you're 20 and you finish studying, you got your PhD, now you have to go back and review everything. Just because you have the highest degree doesn't mean that you're complete. You have to keep on reviewing. That's a second interpretation. A third interpretation is, up until the age of 20, you're not so involved in practical Judaism. It's more theoretical Judaism. Of course you do practical things, but you're still a young person, you're a student, you're engaged in learning. At the age of 20, you have to start pursuing, implementing the theories that you achieved, that you understood, and putting them into practice by acting with fulfilling all of the commandments. Yes, when you're 13, you become obligated, but you don't necessarily have the means, you don't necessarily have the right situation in which you could fulfill all the commandments. And when you reach the age of 20, you have to pursue opportunities to do mitzvahs. Another interpretation is the one that they put here in the brackets, the pursuit of a livelihood. That seems to be the most plausible explanation, that when you reach the age of 20, you already achieved much of what you have to achieve in terms of learning. You're already married. Now it's a time to pursuing a livelihood, actively pursuing it. Another interpretation, a fifth one, this is based on the Torah's describing the age of military conscription when the Jews were in the desert. And every Jew had to be counted from the age, and every male, that is, had to be counted from the age of 20, because 20 was the age of conscription into the army to pursue the threats to our existence. So the age of 20, you pursue your enemy. This is the age of military conscription. And enemy does not only refer to a physical enemy, it also refers to a spiritual enemy. There are all sorts of threats to our humanity, to our Judaism, that lurk all over the world, and we have to take active action to combat that type of enemy. And finally, a sixth interpretation, that it's not referring to the person, that the person has to pursue something. It's referring to God. I mentioned this last week, that although in Jewish law, when you reach the age of bar mitzvah at 13, you become liable and punishable for your crimes that you commit. Those are only the crimes and the punishments that God in the Torah put in the hands of the courts. So if a person, let's say, committed murder, God forbid, and the punishment for murder under certain circumstances would be the death penalty, you have to be 13 years old to be eligible for that. But there are certain sins for which there is no punishment by the court. The punishment is by God himself. That doesn't start until the age of 20. So when God pursues the person in terms of imposing the penalty on them, that pursuit occurs and begins at the age of 20. Okay, then we go on to the age of 30 is strength. It's the peak of strength. That's how commentaries explain it. And what is that based on? It's based on the fact that the Levium, the Levites, one of their responsibilities was to transport the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the desert, and then setting it up and dismantling it. That required a tremendous amount of physical strength. How old did the Levi have to be for that mission? 30. When he was 30 years old, then they were allowed to be involved in the transporting and erecting the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the desert. So that's the basis for the idea that 30 is when you're at your prime of your physical strength. Of course, it's a generalization. Some people are stronger when they're 20. Some people are still stronger when they're 40. But I guess you can look at athletes. What's the prime age for an athlete? It probably depends on the sport. It depends on every individual. But 30 seems to be the time when people are at their prime in terms of their physical strength. But it's not just about physical strength. Whenever we reach a milestone, an intellectual one or a physical one, it has to be used for something positive. Just like the Levites, what did they use their strength for? They didn't use it for boxing matches or wrestling matches. They used it for transporting the sanctuary. And that's what every one of us has this responsibility. We all have to transport the sanctuary, figuratively speaking, wherever we go. Wherever we go, we can't say, well, you know what? I was able to create a place that was receptive to God because this was a place that I think was amenable to that. But when I moved to another place, I moved to another situation, another physical place, geographically speaking, or another situation, I don't think I could build a Mishkan. I can't build a sanctuary there because it's not receptive. Many people in the early 20th century, late 19th century, came to America. They coined the expression that America is different. We can't create sanctuaries. We can't live as Jews in America because America is not Europe. Europe is different. America is different. And that was a terrible, terrible mistake, because what happened as a result of the assimilation is that the majority of Jews who descended from the original Jews who came to America are no longer identified as Jewish. They no longer recognize themselves as Jewish, or even if they do, it doesn't amount to anything because they don't practice anything. That all came about because they didn't use their strength to transport the sanctuary from Europe to America. Some say that, what does it mean when you're 30? It's the time of strength. Up until 30, a person is still mainly preoccupied with himself. You're still focusing on getting the physical means to live. You want to build your career. You want to establish yourself. And that's justifiable. The person has to take care of their own needs and build themselves. But when you reach the age of 30, you have to start thinking about using your strength to help others, to influence others, to strengthen others. That's what he means by the age of 30. The age of 30 is when you have the ability to not only take care of your own physical and spiritual needs, but once you reach this point, this milestone of 30, you have to start spreading out and influencing others in a positive way. In a certain sense, I like to connect it to royalty. The number 30, if we have to communicate with numbers, if I wanted to say a king, I would say 30. So if I talk to you in numbers, I say, hey, 30. Your response is, which king? If I say 50, you could say, that's what we're doing now. We're studying Torah. 50 is a number associated with Torah. So is 10. There are a lot of numbers that are associated with Torah. But why 50? Because 50 is the day at which we got the Torah from God after we left Egypt. God told us to count 50 days. And then we have the giving of the Torah. And other reasons why Torah is associated with the number 50, but royalty is associated with the number 30. Why is that? There are many, many reasons, but I'll just give some few preliminary reasons. Number one, who was the first Jewish king? The first Jewish king was Joseph. He was the king of Egypt. Well, Pharaoh was the king officially, but who ran the country? Joseph. How old was Joseph when he became king? I'll give you 30 guesses. He was 30. Judah is considered to be the king of all the tribes. He was the dominant tribe. That's why the Jews were named after the tribe of Judah. The word Yehuda, numerically, because every letter in Hebrew is a number, adds up to 30. King David, who was the first king in Israel itself, he was the second king, but the first major king, the beginning of the Davidic dynasty, he was 30 years old when he became king. In Ethics of the Fathers, in the next chapter, we're going to be learning that royalty is acquired through 30 different traits. A king has 30 different traits. It doesn't enumerate what they are, but it just connects royalty to the number 30. So when you're 30 years old, that's when you become a king, a monarch. What is a king? The king has two traits. Number one, a king has authority over others. That means that you have the power to influence others. You can do that before you're 30. You don't have to wait till you're 30. And by the way, I just want to mention that all of these numbers are not hard and fast numbers that you can't violate them. A person can't say, you know what, I'm not going to do something that requires strength because I'm only 29 years old. No, you could be 30 when you're 20 years old. You can adopt these traits at any age. So you could be at any age. You can be 5, 10, 13, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, 90, 100. At any point in your life. These are just milestones when these traits are most prominent. So a king has influence over others. That's the definition of a king, a leader, someone who leads others. The age of 30, you can become a leader, you can lead others. But a king has another trait, at least the ideal king. He's a king over himself. He's a king over his own desires, his own interests. He could control himself. That's the age of 30. That's when you have the strength to overcome all the temptations and be able to be a complete person. And that's the real strength of a person, as we learned in Ethics of the Fathers a few chapters ago. Who was a strong person? Not someone who could conquer a country, a city, who conquers his own impulses, his own inclination. Someone who has self-control is a real strong person. So when you reach the age of 30, what is the strength? The strength is that you are in total control. And the Hebrew word for king is melech. And melech is an acronym for 3 parts of the anatomy: moach, brain; lev, heart; kaved, liver, which has the blood in it. That the human being, to be a king, is someone whose mind controls the heart, the emotions, and one's physical drives, which are represented symbolically by the liver. That's what the definition of 30, the age of 30. That's when you become a king. Then we reach the age of 40. The age of 40 is wisdom. No, I'm sorry. Okay, it's their translation. At 40 is the age of Bina. Bina is usually translating as understanding. But what it really means, as Rashi explains, that when you hear something, an idea, and you take and accept and understand the idea, then you only have chachma, then you only have wisdom. You know the idea, you know a lot of facts, you know a lot of theories. Bina is where you could draw inferences. You know A, and from A you can draw an inference to B. That's the age of 40. At the age of 40, when someone tells you something, you're not only able to grasp what they're telling you, you're able to apply it to other things. And in terms of Jewish law, the rabbis have 2 functions. There are 2 kinds of rabbis. I should put it better. There are 2 kinds of rabbis. I'm talking about legitimate rabbis. There's a rabbi who masters all of Jewish law, or enough of Jewish law, so if you ask him a question, he'll tell you, yes, this is what it says in the Code of Jewish Law. But then there are new situations that are not covered by the Code of Jewish Law. Code of Jewish Law is a finite book, and there are new situations that arise. Most rabbis could not give you an answer on the new things. There are certain rabbis who are called poskim, decisors. They are authorities who can give you answer to questions that are not covered by explicit references of Jewish law. What they do is they draw inferences. They take an existing law and they say, what's the underlying principle of this law? And they take that principle and apply it to new situations. That's the age of 40. When you reach the age of 40, whether literally the age of 40 or someone who can mature even sooner than that, you're capable of drawing inferences. And that's why, ideally, one should not be in that position of being a posek, a decisor of Jewish law, until the age of 40. Where do we find this in the Torah? We find this in the Torah. How many years were the Jews in the desert? 40 years. And in those 40 years, we read about many events where the Jews didn't really internalize the Torah that they were given. And that's why they deviated. They built a golden calf. They revolted about going to Israel. There was a rebellion of Korach. They wanted meat, and they were always complaining. But then, at the end of 40 years, Moses had the Torah written, and he gave a copy of it to his tribe, the Levites. And the rest of the Jewish community complained. But their complaint was a good complaint. It says, why are you giving it only to the Levites? What about us? We want the Torah. And Moses was overjoyed that finally the people are demanding something spiritual. They're not asking for meat. They're not asking for whatever. They're asking for power, for anything material. They're asking for something spiritual, something. So what does Moses say? He says, until now, it took 40 years until God gave you eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to feel. It takes 40 years for you to begin to internalize what you learn. Some people could do the 40 years in 20 years, but it's a 40-year program. It's like university. It takes 4 years to get your bachelor's degree, but some people could accelerate it in 3 years, but it's a 4-year program. Reaching the level of bina, of being able to draw inferences, is a 40-year program. So when you hear something today, in 40 years from now, you'll say, wow, I now understand it. And therefore, you have the power to not only teach things that are explicit in the text, but you can also draw inferences and give answers to things. That's 40. Now you reach 50. 50 is the age of counsel. 50 is the age when you could give advice, when you could become a therapist. You could give advice. It's not enough to have understanding, intellectual capacity to draw inferences. In order to give advice, you have to have what some people refer to as the 5th volume of the Code of Jewish Law. The Code of Jewish Law has 4 volumes. But a rabbi, we're told, can't just be content with those 4 volumes. Even if he masters them, he has to have the 5th volume. What is the 5th volume? Common sense. He has to have the ability to know when and where to apply certain things based on the situation, and it can only get that through experience, through life's experience, because so many people swallow books and they have the book knowledge, but they can't relate to what's going on in their own midst. They can't understand people. They don't understand what they're dealing with. I mentioned this in an earlier class, that the Talmud talks about the kidneys, that the kidneys give advice. Now, we all know that kidneys don't give advice, biologically speaking, but it means the kidneys are a filter. Most people don't have filters, and they don't know when to say things, when not to say certain things. You have to know how to filter what you're saying. Even though you have the right knowledge is not always the right thing to say at a particular time. Just like you're not going to tell a child things that only an adult can understand, although today we're living in a world where they want to expose children to every bit of nonsense as children and corrupt them and destroy them. That's today's society, and I know that many people think it's progress, but it's not progress, it's evil, what they're trying to do to children today. Unequivocally, there's no question about it, it's evil, and these people who are trying to push these things on children should be cited for child abuse. But you can have all the knowledge in the world, but you have to have the ability to filter out. There are certain things that you have to know who your audience is. You have to know who you're talking to. What is the capacity of your audience? That is the age of 50, when you have life's experiences. People who went through life may not be as smart as younger people, but they have more common sense, and they know what's right and what's wrong intuitively because they learned from life's experiences. The Talmud says this about the difference between young people and older people. Most people would think that younger people their minds are more intellectually fertile. When they get older, their minds lose a lot of their strength. And that's true in many regards, but it's not absolutely true. Sometimes it's the other way around. The Talmud tells the story, when King Solomon was king, he imposed heavy taxes on the people because they had to build the temple, they had to build the palace. This was a new era, and they were heavily taxed. When he passed away, his son Rechavam took over, and the people protested that the taxes were too high. It's about time to relax the taxing of the people. And King Rechavam consulted with his advisors. He had young advisors and he had old advisors. He had under 50 and 50. Well, I'm not sure about that, but using the terms over here, it would be a pre-50 and a post-50. The pre-50 people, the young advisors, say they're complaining about taxes. Sock it to them. Give them higher taxes. Increase the taxes. Let them not complain. And he went to the older advisors, and they said, reduce the taxes. He listened to the young advisors, the pre-50s, and he lost control of most of the country. 10 of the 12 tribes seceded from the Union, and we had 2 Jewish states. So we know what a 2-state solution is. It's not a solution, even if they're both Jewish. It's certainly not a solution if one is Jewish and one is Arab, but that's another story. So the Talmud says, from this we learn that sometimes the building of the young people is destruction, and the demolition of the old is building. When you see someone demolishing a building, you say, why are they demolishing a building? But it's in order to build something much better, much sturdier. Sometimes you're building something beautiful, and everyone is enamored. Wow, that's a beautiful construction, but they're really building something that's going to collapse, and it's going to cause a lot of damage. So 50 is the age, the milestone, when you're not just filled with book knowledge, with intellectual capacity, but you're able to filter out the nonsense and know when and where to say what you have to say. Where do we find 50 as being the age of counsel? There's no explicit reference to it, but there is a hint in the Torah. I mentioned before that the Levites would start their work at the age of 30, but they would retire at the age of 50. Torah says they wouldn't go back to their work at 50. So what do they do at the age of 50? They all went to Florida to play golf. But there was no Florida then, and there was no golf then. So what did they do at the age of 50? The age of 50, that's when they became advisors. They were able to counsel the younger people because they had life's experiences. And that's what gave them the advantage over all the others at that age of 50. I mentioned this once before. There was a famous woman who went through the Holocaust, and she became a very major speaker and teacher. Her name was Rabbi Youngreis. And she was once asked, what university did you go to? Because she spoke English perfectly, and she was a very educated woman. So she says she went through the University of Bergen-Belsen. She never went to university, but she went through the Holocaust, and that gave her the ability to give very, very wise, sage advice to people, because she knew life better than most young people in this country and most older people. Anyhow, that's the age of 50. Then we get to the age of 60. At the age of 60, that's the age of old age. What is that? Why is it trying to make us feel depressed? You reach the age of 60, you want to be uplifted, and you're telling everyone you reach 60, you're already old. But old over here doesn't mean old in the physical sense that you're incapable of doing anything, you're burnt out already. The Hebrew word for old, zakein, the Talmud says, is an acronym for Zeh Shekana Chachma. This is the one who acquires wisdom. Actually, it only has the 2 words, this is the one who acquires. But what could you acquire that has any value? You're going to buy a new car? It's not going to last very long. You're going to buy a new house? It also doesn't last forever. It deteriorates. Everything in this world deteriorates. There's nothing in this world that improves with age. Maybe wine that improves with age. But most other things decline with the passage of life. But wisdom is something that never declines. So if you're talking about acquiring something, the only true acquisition is wisdom. And there's a phrase that says, Deya chasarta, if you're lacking knowledge, ma kanisa, what did you acquire? Deya kanisa, if you acquired knowledge, ma chasarta, what are you missing? If you have knowledge, you have everything. So when a person reaches the age of 60 and they're ready to retire physically and they're not as strong as they used to be, most people at the age of 60 are much weaker than they were before, this is an opportunity to strengthen their spiritual lives with learning more. The older we get, the more opportunities we have to learn, because we have fewer opportunities to do other things. And that doesn't mean that we should look at ourselves and say we're spent, we're wasted already, we're deteriorating, we're declining. I know that's how a lot of people in nursing homes feel, that they're useless, their lives have no meaning anymore because they're older. And that's what he's trying to say, is that's not true. When you're 60 and you get older and weaker, you get stronger in your spiritual life. You have the opportunities to do things that you could never have done when you were young. But then when you reach 70, that's the age of, I'm trying to find a good translation for it. They don't have a good translation. They just say, at the age of 70, fullness of years. Here it means hoary old age. You're really old when you're 70. But in a positive way.
That's all contextual, though, because Moses lived beyond.
Right. King David died when he was 70, and the Torah, the book of Samuel says, or Kings, and he died at very old age, a good old age. What does that tell you? So it has a few things. Number one, that tells you that every day that you're alive after 70 is a gift. All of life is a gift, but it's a special gift. And when someone gives you a gift, you show appreciation. So you should be a lot more grateful for being alive after 70 than you were before. You should always be grateful, and we thank God for every minute of our lives. But especially if you're older than 70, you have to be especially grateful, because it's a special gift. Another thing, in the Torah it says we're supposed to respect senior citizens. Now the simple meaning is not someone who is necessarily old, but someone who has wisdom. If someone who has wisdom walks into the room, we're talking about Torah wisdom, you're supposed to stand up, or at least make a gesture of respect. What about an old person, chronologically speaking, who isn't knowledgeable? Just an average person. So if he reaches the age of 70, you're supposed to stand up for that person when that person walks in, or some gesture of respect. You respect seniority. It's not just giving them a seat on the bus. You should do that as well. If a senior citizen needs a seat and you're sitting there, give them the seat. That's a sign of respect. We respect old age. There are certain cultures that really revere their seniors, the Chinese, for example, but Judaism is no exception to that rule of showing respect to people who are older than you, especially if they have reached the age of 70. Another interpretation, which is not a literal one, if you translate the words in the Torah, you should get up for an older person. It could also be translated, you should get yourself up before you get old. Don't wait until you're old to straighten out your life, to really become a mensch. Don't postpone it. Before you reach the old age, stand up, stand yourself up, establish yourself in the right way. And then we get to 80. Age of 80 is the age of strength. King David in Psalms says, the days of a person is 70 years, but if he's strong, it's 80 years. Whose strength are we talking about? So Rashi says, it's God's strength. That means God is giving you extra years. But the other commentaries say that it means spiritual strength. That even when you're 80 years old, you would think, I don't have to deal with my evil inclination. I'm beyond that. I don't have the desires. I don't have the temptations that I had when I was young. I don't have the raging hormones. I'm beyond all these tests. He says, no, don't when you are 80, you still have to have the strength to overcome temptation. Maybe a different kind of temptation. When you're young, you have certain kinds of temptations. When you get older, I find this with a lot of people, that when they get older, the desire for money becomes stronger, not weaker. Maybe other desires get weaker with age, but the desire for money, desire for power, the first few decades of your life, it's sexual desires. The next few decades, it's desire for power. And then, now we're having an election with two presidential candidates are in their third stage of life, and they're still looking for power. I don't know why they would want power. But usually at that age, you want money. Not you.
No, I talk about who look for right now. He don't know what he needed, but people told to him he needed.
Okay.
Follow the advice.
Okay, but usually when you get much older, you give up on the things that you wanted when you were younger, but you still have desires for things. It just changes. Every person is different, of course. And the proof of this is that after 80 years, you still have challenges, spiritual challenges. The Talmud tells us there was a high priest during the Second Temple era. His name was Yochanan. To be a high priest, you have to be a righteous person. You couldn't just be a nobody. And if you were a nobody and you didn't deserve to be high priest, the likelihood was that you wouldn't survive. Almost every Yom Kippur, any high priest who entered into the Holy of Holies would not come out alive. If he came out alive, he would die within the year. That was almost every year in the Second Temple, with a few exceptions. One of the exceptions was Yochanan, and he lasted until he was 80 years old. At the age of 80, he turned into a heretic. He rebelled against Judaism. So what does that tell you? That you can be 80 years old and your life is a full, complete life, but after the age of 80, you can still have challenges, spiritual challenges. Your life is not over. You still have to struggle. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Why? Because every time we struggle to do something right, to overcome temptation, to overcome the negatives, that's what life is all about. That's what our Judaism is all about, to gain control over ourselves. And every time we have a struggle, we win the battle, we should say, thank you, God. I know of stories of people who had struggles, and every time they passed the test, they would say, I want to give my passing of my test, the merit that I acquired, I want to give it to so-and-so who was sick, that they should recover. And there are so many miracle stories of people who did this, and their giving of their merit worked. So every time we have a challenge and we meet the challenge, we acquire merit for ourselves, and we could pass it on to others as well. So when you're 80 years old, it's not the age of retirement from life. You still have the challenges that any other person younger has as well. When you're 90, literally, it's a bent body. That's one version of it. What that means physically, bent body, literally speaking, when a person reaches the age of 90, it's the curvature of the spine causes you to be bent over. But it also means that your physical interests are now humbled. You're no longer, at the age of 80, you still have certain physical interests. 90 is where they get much weaker. But some say that the vowel should be different. Instead of the word lashuach, which is bent, it should be lasuach, which means is the time of speech. That when you're 90 years old, there's not much you can do physically, and this is we're generalizing, obviously. There are people who are 100 years old and they're still active, and they can still be athletes. But the average person reaches the age of 90, they can't do many physical things, so they can't do so many things that are wrong. They can't commit crimes, but they still have speech. That's what he says. When you're 90, the challenge is your speech. You could be sitting in a wheelchair. One could be sitting in a wheelchair in a nursing home and gossiping with the next person in a wheelchair and slandering someone, using the tongue for lashon hara, for evil tongue, for speaking ill of others. That challenge hasn't changed. In fact, that's the major challenge for people who get older. The only thing left they can do physically is to talk. And they have to make sure that talking is kosher talking. And that means avoiding negative talk, and it also means trying to find good things and positive things to say about other people. And study of Torah to what extent, and prayer. Study of Torah might even be difficult, but prayer is not difficult, even at the age of 90. Torah study requires intellectual capacity, and some people at the age of 90 have lost it. But the prayer is something that you just need to be able to vocalize the words, and that's what the age of 90 is for. Now, when you reach 100, he says you're as good as dead and gone completely out of the world.
Fresh.
It's a little harsh, yeah. So the Hasidic interpretation of this is that when you reach 100, which means when you reach a state of perfection, because 100 represents perfection, 100%. 10 is the perfect number, and multiplied by 10 is the ultimate perfect number. When you reach the age of 100, the age of perfection, you transcend the world. The word world in Hebrew means concealment. God is concealed, but when you reach the stage of 100 in your life, you transcend concealment. So it's a positive thing, not a negative thing. But even those who translate it literally as in a negative way, it's there to warn us, to tell us, why wait until you're no longer part of this world? Why wait until, God forbid, people suffer from dementia and they're not able to change their lives? Don't wait for that to happen. Change your life when you're younger, when you still have all your faculties and you're still able to change, to do good and to do tshuva, to repent and what you did wrong. Because when you reach the age of 100, and some people could reach the age of 100 when they're 60 or 70 or earlier, then it's hard for them to change. Don't postpone what you can do when you're younger, because when you reach a certain point, you might no longer be part of this world. You're no longer capable of making a difference. So don't wait until it's too late. So with this, we conclude the 5th chapter of Ethics of the Fathers. Next week, I won't be here, so we won't have a class next week. But in 2 weeks, yes?
So what does mean in Jewish 120?
Moses lived to the age of 120. So when people wish one another long life, they would use the expression, you should live to 120. Although everyone knows that the likelihood of that happening is very small, but the more you ask God for, the more you may get.
They found in science that genetically genes are optimally built to exist on.
Right, but there's also scientific research showing that they could expand life.
Yeah.
And not only expand it, but also make it possible for a person to live forever. And one of the things that I found troubling when I came to Buffalo, and I had to deal with people who were quote-unquote secular, is that people, when you would wish them to, you should live to 120, say, oh, no, I don't want to live that long. And it hurt me very much. I felt like a dagger, because I grew up where people would wish one another, you should live to 120. Everyone coveted life. They treasured life and want to live longer and longer. And then all of a sudden I'm hearing people say, no, I don't want to live to 100, because who wants to live to 100? Now obviously we want to live to 100 with our faculties intact and with good health. So we can wish that as well. God has it all. Why tell God, don't give me the 100 years because I don't know if I'll be healthy? Just add in the request, say, God, give me 100 years, and they should be years of good health. It's not, God has the power to do both. Yes.
And what age start personal responsibility?
13. I think you reached that age.
Yes.
You're young, but they're not that young.
But do you know, I say to my students, 8, 9 years old exactly, you have to have your responsibility.
We teach children responsibility before the 13, because if they wake up on the 13 to first discover there's something called responsibility, the likelihood is that they're not going to be very responsible. That's why Judaism has what is called chinuch, education, which means that you have to prepare the child before the 13 and make them do the things that they're going to be doing when they're 13, but they do it even beforehand. So we don't teach responsibility at 13. We teach it much earlier so that when they turn 13, they should be fully responsible.